Good evening, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad to host yet another webinar of Olainfarm. As usual, after publication of our quarterly numbers, we do a webinar and have a closer look at how we've been doing during the period. So yes, let's therefore start, and let's therefore have a quick look at third quarter of this year, and of course at the 9 months too. So third quarter, you see in this chart from all the third quarters that we have been operating. In terms of sales, this has been a very good third quarter. Our sales are up by 15% compared to what they were 1 year ago, and they totaled slightly above 25 million euros. Sales of pharmacies, gross sales of pharmacies were 4.4 million euros. Net, that's after consolidation correction, there were 2.2 million. Sylvanos in this period made sales of 1.3 million, and after consolidation correction there was 1.1 million. And Tonus Hellas, since virtually no mutual transactions are taking place between Tonus Hellas and other companies of the group, both gross and net sales were 1.8 million. So this is how much our total companies contributed to consolidated sales numbers. As far as profits are concerned, according to these preliminary numbers, they are at 1.7 million euros, which is a reduction of 41.3% compared to the third quarter of last year. There were several provisions that we made in Q3. Namely, this is yet another 1 million provisions for Ukrainians, about 0.5 million provisions for Russian receivables, and 0.7 million euros provisions for potential revaluation or impairment of our asset, which is a newly acquired other company, NPK Biotest in Belarus. So a total of 2.2 million euros were used in provisions in Q3 alone. So again, if you add up these 2.2 million, that would make then we would have a net profit of 3.9 million euros in this quarter, and that would make it the best or one of the best third quarters ever. Now. If you look at EBITDA margin, in 9 months it's at 13.4 million and margin at 17%. 12-month rolling are at 18.8 million or 18.1% EBITDA margin. Again, heavily hit by provisions. As all provisions are booked as other costs, they are therefore directly influencing EBITDA. And whatever I said in my previous slide regarding Q3, the same plus Q2 plus Q1 plus whatever happened in Q4 last year is of course influencing these EBITDA and EBITDA margin figures. If you look at sales by countries, Q3 separately, we see some change. If you're following our webinars on a regular basis, you may remember that in Q2 Russia was performing outstandingly. They had 36% share in our sales. Now that is down to 28% in third quarter. Since they had some weak month in third quarter, and since no Tonus Hellas sales were made to Russia pretty much throughout Q3, Latvia is increasing its share from 22% in Q2 to 26% in Q3. Ukraine shrunk a bit to 13%. Had again some shipments of para-aminosalicylate acid to Netherlands or to WHO, so therefore Netherlands are back at 5%. And very strong sales by Tonus Hellas to Czech Republic brought Czech Republic in our pie chart at position number 8. So Czech Republic is indeed one of the key markets for Tonus. So we hope to see that country in our pie chart now on a more regular basis. Now, if you look at Olainfarm's products in the same third quarter, Nerimidine is still a leader, same 19%, still followed by Norfin with the same 15%. Later on, of course, there are some changes, as you saw previously. Netherlands have improved, and it's only PASA that we ship in Netherlands, and so that's number 3 product in this quarter with 14% share. Adaptol, there's some significant reductions from 13% to 9%. Fencro also has significant reduction to 4%, but Remantadine is joined top 10 products in Q3. And these last changes, Fencro falling and Remantadine increasing, are like typical normal seasonal adjustments Fencro being anti-allergic product, and of course allergies are more related to spring, summertime, whereas Remantadine is a typical cold and flu product, which of course are more typical symptoms for autumn and winter time. So that change has taken place for these two products. Now I think since we pretty much covered Q3, let me start with the poll questions. I'll ask Eva to place one. The first is a very traditional one. What do you think of our Q3 results? Are they better than expected? Are they worse than expected, or are they just as you expected? I'll give you a bit of time to think and give answers to that. Please take a few seconds. Okay, since only 12 of attendees, I think it was more than enough time to make your vote. Now let's have a look at how we've been doing in 9 months. Sales in 9 months. In terms of sales, you see we are performing very good this year. We increased our sales 9% compared to the same period of last year, and the total sales we made were 78.7 million, or 78.7% of our annual target, which still is 100 million. This great increase by 9% really is, if you remember the few slides back when we had a look at quarterly sales, Q2 and Q3 have been particularly good this year, and so they made a major contribution to make this increase quite significant. Again record, best 9 months so far. Out of these 78.7 million, pharmacies added 6.6, Silvanols added 3.2, and Tonus added 3.5 million after all the consolidation corrections. Without that, you see the sales of these companies, of course, were much bigger. If you look at profits, preliminarily, we are at 7.8 million euros. After all the provisions, which are close to 5 million that we made in these 9 months for Russian, Ukrainian receivables and expected impairment of Biotest. There is, of course, therefore a reduction by 36% compared to 9 months of last year. Yes, profit guidance of 10 million, which we declared earlier this year. Out of that 10 million, 78%, we believe we met in 3 quarters. So the products, if you look at them in terms of how much they add to the growth, you can see the breakdown of 15 best-selling products, 9 months of 2016 compared to 9 months of 2015. In monetary terms, it's Nuofen who's added the most. It's almost 1.5 million euros. Etizine has added 560,000. And Fencro has added 370,000. In total, out of 15 products, 10 are growing. In relative terms, it's Neomidantane that has been growing by 164%. Of course, the base was really small. Chlorine 3.5 dimethyl adamantane, the product with that easy name, has grown by 48%, and Remantadine has grown this year by 36%. In terms of loss, in monetary terms, of course, you can see that in chart, the para-aminosalicic acid has experienced the biggest decline in sales. They're down by 2.5 million. Our best-selling product, Neromidine, has lost another 700,000 in sales. And Furadonine, reasonably small product, still we lost about 200,000 in sales with that one. In relative terms, it's still para-aminosalicic acid, which lost 28%, as did Memantine, and Furadonine lost something like 10% of sales. Total growth of all of our products was about 600,000 euros, but that's you know, you have to take into consideration the big fall by para-aminosilicic acid. So if you ignore that product, and that product is depending on how well we perform in tenders. So if you take away impact of that product, then you can say that Olainfarm's typical Olainfarm product has product sales have grown by about 2.7 million euros. Now, if you look at countries, 12 out of top 15 countries were growing, and in monetary terms, a lot has been added by Ukraine. Ukraine added 3.3 million. Latvia added 2.5 million, and Belarus added 1.2 million. To be honest, at the beginning of the year, we never thought that Ukraine and Belarus would be performing that well. In relative terms, the biggest growth comes from Czech Republic that I referred to earlier. We've been shipping something to Czech Republic, and Silonos has done a little sales, but Tonoselast, of course, has added a lot in terms of sales to Czech Republic. It's therefore 1,584%. That sales to this country have grown. Sales to Italy, we mostly sell chemical products, have grown by 152%, and sales to Uzbekistan have grown by 72%. In terms of loss, the biggest loss in monetary terms comes from the Netherlands. That's the, as you know, that's where the logistics center of World Health Organization is located, and that's where we ship our para-aminosilicic acid. So we lost 3.3 million sales to Netherlands compared to last year. We lost 1.7 million in Russia. We are catching up to Russia, but might not be able to make it before the end of the year. And Tajikistan lost about 260,000. So in relative terms, the picture is pretty much the same. You see 67% sales lost to Netherlands, 28% sales lost to Tajikistan, and 7% sales lost in Russia. So what else have we've been doing since our last webinar? We have another market maker. Since October the 3rd, LHV Bank is another liquidity provider for shares of Olainfarm. We already have one liquidity provider, which initially was Finasta, and then they transferred this contract to Šiaulių bankas. We have that since 2012. LHV will provide bid and ask of 15,000 euros a day, of 2.5% maximum spread, and a single bid ask position not below 3,000 euros. Now, it would be interesting now to see what you think. Now we have two market makers, and let me ask you: do you think that's enough? Do you maybe think that two market makers is already too much, or maybe you think we should add one more, or maybe you think that we should have as many companies as possible doing the liquidity providing for us? That's important to know, because we really want to know: do we continue with sourcing that service, or two would be fine for time being? Because quite frequently I do hear that liquidity of Olainfarm shares in general in the Baltics leaves much to be decided, and not much to be desired. So I really want to hear your first-hand opinion, whether that's something that we should focus, or it's totally fine with what we already have here. I'll give you a few more seconds. Okay, thank you, Eva. Yes, we also received yet another award, a Swiss-based company called CE Services with their asset management arm. Been awarding corporate excellence awards in the Baltics for the last 9 years or so. Out of those 9 years, 5 times we've been named best company in Latvia, and this year is the first year we were named best company in the Baltics. Harju Elektra and Apranga were best companies in Estonia and Lithuania, respectively. Also, what we did in meantime, we did our road show, and we started it. This is the 3rd year we do that. We started it in 2014 was our first one. We went on the Baltic Nordic Roadshow between October 24th and 28th. We had about 20 meetings in 6 cities, and this was the first roadshow where we covered Warsaw and Copenhagen as well. Traditionally, that was Vilnius, Stockholm, Helsinki, and Tallinn. Now it was 6 cities instead of 4. And I have again a question for you about this. And the question is, did you meet us, or did we meet you during the roadshow? Please say yes, or no, but you wanted, no, but you didn't know, or maybe we were not even in your town. That again would provide us helpful information for our future activities like that. Should we extend the number of towns? Should we have more time in each town, or everything is probably just fine and we should continue as we are? Again, a few more seconds for you to decide. Okay, thank you. Also, what happened? We also made another acquisition. We acquired a medical company called Diamed, or Klinika Diamed in full name, and they are one of the Latvian leaders in radiological diagnostics. They've been in this segment for about 10 years, and this is our first acquisition in healthcare sector. And we do expect that if this acquisition turns out to be successful, company performs well, then we might as well add several other healthcare providers to this subsegment in next years to come. Company's sales are fluctuating slightly above 1 million euros for the last number of years, but they've been loss-making for several years in a row, mainly, and we studied the company carefully, mainly to quite a few one-offs that the company has had, not least related to moving from premise to premise, and some very sophisticated high-tech radiological equipment is extremely difficult to move. So sometimes just moving from one place to another in their case might cost several hundreds of thousands of euros. We do expect that this thing will stabilize. We do expect that we'll be able to have more services added to what they provide currently. We do expect that we'll be able to make a better use of several assets this company has, including the surgery space. So therefore, we are fairly optimistic about the future potential for this company. Also, very recently, indeed, a few days ago, we completed the acquisition of a Belarusian company called MPK Biotest. We announced the acquisition earlier in September. We started with 24%, and for a number of reasons related to the specifics of Belarusian legislation. We did that in stages, and currently we now own 100% of it. In total, we paid 3.7 million euros. Now, for those of you who might miss this, this company is based in Grodno. It's currently producing herbal teas, powders, and mixtures, and it also has several pharmacies in that town. And we expect to turn Biotest into our sort of packaging base for our products in Belarus. Therefore, that would not only solve some of the protectionist issues that we have from time to time with Belarus authorities, but it also might allow us to enjoy several of the benefits that are provided by Belarus authorities to Belarus-based companies. Yes, in other words, we would sort of become locals in Belarus. Now, for those of you who have joined me in our last webinar, I sort of almost promised to have a closer look at how is it that company does develop new products, what processes do we have to go through, and how difficult, costly, lengthy, and whatever it is. Of course, might be interesting for many people to see. But with Q3 and with what feedback I had during the roadshow, I decided to change the plan a little and focus on provisions in this year and a little bit in previous years and maybe next years. As you saw in our financial figures, they do impact our performance this year very much. So I think for those of you who are doing some analysis of our performance, this might be a little bit more valuable. Already from the beginning of this year, when all of a sudden, after the profit of more than 15 million, we decided that our profit target for this year would be 10 million. It was kind of a shock for many, but already then we knew that we will need to come up with some quite serious provisions this year. So we were quite pessimistic from day one. You know, if you follow us, then every single quarter, because of different provisions, you know, each single quarter, our EBIT and net profits were slightly deteriorating. Let's have a closer look at what exactly it is. Now, the biggest, excuse me, the biggest source of provisions, the biggest reason, or the reason for the biggest provisions this year really comes from our Ukrainian client called OLFA. The huge receivables that we had from that company really date back to 2012. And here I have a chart for you about how our Ukrainian sales have been doing this time. Again, for those of you who remember, have been following us quite carefully, you may remember that in 2012 we had an excess shipments to Ukraine, had fantastic sales there, because we were really filling in the system for several administrative reasons. And very soon after that, all sorts of political and economic issues came up in Ukraine, which later in the process led to foreign currency shortages, hryvnia devaluations, overall deterioration of economic situation, and we had this partner with huge debt to us at the time. It was about 12 million, of course, reasonably, we should have provided for that instantly. But we were lucky enough to have a no recourse factorizing for that debt at the time provided by a Latvian bank called Trasta Komercbanka, and we had this factorizing for several years in a row, and our clients' financial situation was gradually improving, and they were paying us more than we made new shipments to them, and through that we managed to reduce outstanding debt to them from 12 million to 9 million. And it seemed like if few more years of factorizing, and we'll reduce the outstanding debt to decent levels, and no provisions would be required. But Trasta Komercbanka ceased its operations earlier this year. We did search for a sensibly priced insurance for this debt, which was not available, and therefore, from sort of being a conservative and prudent managers, we did decide that we must come up with provisions to this debt until the levels when we feel more comfortable, and therefore 4 million was identified as a decent enough level of provisions that we started to build throughout 2016, every month providing about 1 million. And therefore we already provided 3 million for this client in 2016, and certainly will provide 1 more million in Q4. Thing is that the company continues operating, and the company continues paying, and they're still paying us very nicely, and still the outstanding amount keeps reducing. And if it continues in this pace for 2 to 3 years to come, we do believe that we'll be able to reverse at least some of the provisions, and gradually probably even all of them. The money hasn't gone anywhere. It hasn't been paid to insurance companies or something, credit insurance companies. So it's pretty much an internal accounting exercise, and if that eventually gets repaid, then of course these monies would come back to our profits. Anyway, for this year we have decided to make 4 million in provisions, and 3 out of them are already done. If the situation stays as it is, no more provisions after these 4 million are expected for this client. Now, a company called Biotest that I spoke a little recently In September, we acquired 70% for 2.6 million. Recently completed 200% for 3.7 million, as I said. The main asset, in our opinion, of that company really was a local GMP certificate and an acceptable production site. The company already is packing some herbal teas and having some pharmacies locally, but the main asset really, as we saw it, is the site with the possibility to do packing of our product, to become locals for Belarus, and if they harmonize the legislation inside Customs Union, we might be even treated as locals and in several other Customs Union countries. And we have already had some discussions with other non-Customs Union based companies that would be interested in the same mechanism. Yes, the preservation of our Belarusian sales, and you see here in the chart that we do expect that this year our Belarusian sales might exceed 8 million euros. So preservation of our sales to this country really was the key reason, the key sort of asset that we had in mind. But more investments are required before we can launch what we have in mind. Therefore, the overall value of this asset might have difficulties passing the impairment test, and therefore we decided that sort of the final impairment conclusion hasn't been made yet, but from the information they have at the moment, it seems like a total of 1.4 million for this asset might need to be provided for the potential impairment of it. Well, three companies, which basically is one company, dates back to 2013, 2014, and about that time, Finnish company Oriola. Previously, they had their wholesaling unit, wholesaling subsidiary in Russia, called Oriola. And in about 2014, they sold it, and soon after, the company faced certain financial difficulties. Outstanding payable to us at the time was likely about 1 million euros, and those were immediately provided. The company got renamed into MedSnub. New owners wanted still to work with us and agreed with us about the schedule for how they will pay us back in both cash and services. Therefore, based on that agreement, we reversed 979,000. But it's very little they kept from what they promised, and the agreed schedule was really ignored pretty much by them. Therefore, 960,000 we decided to again provide back this year. So that adds another million to our overall provisions. Now, two acquisitions of ours that might have some questions with it, some issues. Kivvi, the eco-cosmetics company. Remember in our previous webinar, I was focusing on financials of all the Belgian companies that we have at the time, and one could clearly see a huge improvement for Kivvi, but still it's reasonably small size and still not convincingly good from many aspects. So the impairment test of this asset is still undergoing, but we have certain reasons to believe that about 200,000 euros will not justify in the impairment test. So therefore, we have in mind that in Q4 of 2004 we might need to provide that much. As far as Diamed is concerned, we have our business plan on them. We believe that they might become profitable in 2018. There are several assumptions, of course, involved, and the question is if we agree amongst themselves and with auditors about those assumptions, then no provisions would be necessary for this asset. However, if you don't, then provisions of up to 300,000 might be necessary in Q4 2016. But my belief is that the possibility that we will have to come up with these provisions is really, really small. Well, some other provisions that have taken place recently. Some of the provisions that we previously made to Russian client called Rosta will be reversed, and one of them was quite big, so it's quite big. It's 942,000 euros. So as payment has been received. Situation with Uzbekistan has worsened somehow. You remember Uzbekistan was growing in terms of sales, was growing quite nicely, but for a number of reasons, I believe not least because of some political and economic shake-ups there. The payment discipline of Uzbekistan has undergone some changes, and not for the best. Again, trying to be prudent, and we think 30% of the outstanding receivables, or 226,000 euros, might be safe, prudent to provide for that in Q4 of this year. So now, the long story short, now the provisions. So here you see what we already have in 2016, what we plan to have at the end of 2016. And therefore, what is left to have in the last quarter of 2016. So you see that we do plan that in last quarter we will have to make slightly more than 2 million euros of new provisions. Like I said, we were very careful and trying to be very reasonable at all the impairment tests, not to make provisions today and have them reversed later. So really trying to make our provision decisions justified. So if you look at 2016, the total number of expected provisions really is impressive. It's almost 7 million. Now, good news is that we've never had this many provisions before, and very good news is that we don't expect these huge provisions to have anywhere else in the near future, or maybe never at all. So now let us dream a little and see how this year would have looked if there were no provisions. So what we see here, I didn't go into details with EBITDA and EBIT or any other kinds of profitability. It's just purely provisions, net profit, and what would net profit look if there were no provisions that given year. Now see, in 2013 we had the reversal of provisions of 256. 2014 we provided 1.3 million. 2015 we again had some reversal of provisions, and 2016 huge provisions of nearly 7 million. After all those provisions, our sort of expectation or adjustment of what we think our final consolidated net profit might look is about 9 million euros. So if we add those two together, then the profit would have been, I know it sounds strange but to say that, but so it would have been 15.7. And last year with the correction it would have been 14.5, and so on and so forth. You can see that in the table. Yeah, what I'm trying to say here really, if we ignore these things, which really are sort of one-offs, then you see that it's all right with the profitability of a company. Sales are growing, our profits are growing. It's just that this year, because of whatever's happened in 2012, whatever's happened in Ukraine, and the prudency that we want to maintain, we have decided to be very, very careful with some of those assets. We believe there will be no necessity to ever have that huge provisions in the future. And therefore the correction in profitabilities. But we believe that next year we will be performing better in this sense. Now, this is the last slide, and before we move to Q&A, may I ask Eva to have the very last question for the poll. And it really is, I'm really curious to hear your opinion. What do you think about our approaches towards provisions? Are we being too careful? Are we not careful enough? Or it's totally fair, it's totally valid assumptions, approaches that we have taken? Excuse me. Please take your time and cast your vote. And yeah, soon after that, when that's done, I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. Yes. Good. So yeah.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. Yeah. Let's proceed with the questions in the order they were received. A reminder to those who haven't yet submitted their questions, you can do that in the questions sections in the setting panel zone. And the first question is, should we expect more provisions regarding Ukraine clients, and are there still any agreements, trade going on with the clients with whom provisions are connected?
Yes, as far as the first part of the question is concerned, I believe I already answered. We do expect $1 more million to be provided for an Ukrainian client. As far as whether or not we continue business with the partners that we have provisions for, it really depends on each particular case. You know, this long story which started with Ariola and then MedSnap and then Aptek. I'm afraid we've been, you know, sort of fooled so many times that there's absolutely no desire to have any relations with them, except for litigation, maybe. But and then Uzbekistani company, I mean, they are paying. I know that in Uzbekistan they increasingly have forex problems and the conversion, problems with converting currency, and some companies do that better, some companies do that worse. We are trying to gradually move to companies that are doing it better, but then again, they cannot provide the sales volumes, they cannot cover entire Uzbekistan on their own. So that's pretty much the balancing act. As far as OLFA is concerned, the company is paying. It overall, the company's overall debt has been reduced very significantly. Company has a sales force of our products in Ukraine. Company's payment discipline has improved a lot, and therefore we are full scale continuing working with them. So it's really on a case by case basis. If a company has been really, you know, mean in terms of not paying, then of course there is no way we're going to continue. Emma?
Thank you, Salvi. The next question is, are there any recent developments, improvements regarding Turkey?
Yeah, regarding Turkey, you know, whatever happened in Turkey in July this year, the Q attempt, you may have heard that among other things resulted in replacement of many officers, many clerks, pretty much throughout all the public administration of Turkey, including all sorts of healthcare authorities. Therefore, that process has slowed down significantly. Now, the changes that needed to be made, or that the government wanted to make, are made, and now we're back on track. I'm personally going to be, hopefully, going to see our partners responsible for Turkish registration next week, so they'll be able to provide maybe greater details on that. But short answer to this question is you know, things are moving ahead, but for those political disturbances that Turkey saw, they seem to be taking a bit longer time than we initially thought. Emma?
Thank you. One of the participants is wondering, should we understand your final slide to mean that you are now guiding for 2016 net profit of 9 million euros rather than 10 million euros?
Short answer to that is yes. That's you know, we now know quite precisely what the growth margins and all the details of our company are for this year, and we know precisely what three quarters have gone, and we also know quite precisely what extra provisions are required. So yes, you can treat this as our profit guidance for 2016. Yeah.
Currently, the last question is, how is the sales performance so far of Tonus versus your expectations at the time of acquisition?
It's almost exactly as we thought. Like we said at the time of acquisition, we said that we want to reorganize some of the trade channels and trade practices that Tonus Elast was doing prior to acquisition. We have been successful so far in what we're doing, except with some 3 to 4 month delay. In other words, for a number of technical reasons, Tonus Elast has had a very poor to no sales in Russia for almost 4 months. We expected some disruptions. We thought they would be shorter, but now sales are almost fully back on track. And yes, they are very, very close, except for a few months fallout. That would be my answer. Eva?
There's one more question. Could you please elaborate a bit on the history of OLFA? How was it related to Olainfarm?
History of OLFA dates back to 1997 or so. Well, no, it's 1998, I believe. The history of it is that after the Russian default in when was it, 1998, many heads of big pharma rep offices in Ukraine were fired and therefore looking for new challenges, and some of them created the company called OLFA. One of the persons involved in that was a person named Elena Dudko, who was a member of our council for several years. She was previously head of I think it was MSD, but I might be mistaken. Some of the big pharma companies in Ukraine, and with the partners in those times decided to come up to create a wholesaling and marketing structure in Ukraine. So that's how it was related to Olainfarm. And Olainfarm by far not the only. Yeah, and by the way, the OLFA, it has nothing to do with Olainfarm. It's a Russian name, Yelena. In Ukrainian, is pronounced as Olena. So it's Olena and pharmacy. So it's not Olainfarm. Yeah, so that's how it was related. Yeah.
Hey, thank you, Salvi. It seems that all questions are answered. As always, recording of the webinar will be available in the Nasdaq Baltic YouTube channel and in company's announcements. Salvi, thanks for spending the last hour with us. Participants, thank you for joining.
And I think Eva deserves a big round of virtual applause for being very great at her very first webinar. Eva, you did fantastic.
Thank you, Salvi.
Okay, everybody else, thank you very much for joining, and hope you enjoy this very special part of the year, which I love to call Christmas time. And see you next year, and all the best for next year. Thank you.